Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's historical nightmare, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the brutal realities of the past. Today, we're traveling to Imperial China, a civilization that spanned thousands of years and produced some of humanity's greatest achievements. But here's the thing, you wouldn't last a day there, not even close. We're talking about a world where your social status was literally tattooed onto your existence from birth, where the emperor was considered the living link between heaven and earth, and where stepping out of line could result in punishments that make modern prison systems look like luxury resorts. From the stifling hierarchy of the Forbidden City to the back-breaking labour of rice paddies, from the excruciating foot-binding practices to the terror of imperial examinations that could make or break entire families, Imperial China was a pressure cooker of expectations, dangers, and survival challenges that would crush the average modern person within hours. So grab your tea, not the stuff you're used to, but the bitter, weak brew that peasants drank to stay hydrated, and let's explore why you absolutely wouldn't survive in one of history's most complex and unforgiving civilizations. This is going to be intense. Chapter 1. Welcome to the hierarchy. Your place is already decided. You wake up in Imperial China, and the first thing you need to understand is this. Who you are has already been determined. Your family name, your birthplace, your parents' occupation, these aren't just details. They're your entire destiny, carved in stone before you took your first breath. Let's say you're born into a peasant family in rural Hunan province during the Ming dynasty. Congratulations, you're part of roughly 90% of the population. Your father works the fields, your mother weaves and tends to silkworms, and you're going to do exactly the same thing they did, and their parents before them, and their parents before them. The concept of social mobility exists in theory through the imperial examination system, but the reality is far grimmer. Your family owns no land. You work on parcels owned by the local gentry, and in exchange for the privilege of not starving, you give them half of everything you produce, sometimes more. During bad years, you go into debt. During really bad years, you sell your children. This isn't metaphorical. Child selling was a documented practice during times of famine, and families had to make impossible choices about which children they could afford to feed. Your home is a single-room structure made of rammed earth with a thatch roof that leaks every time it rains. The floor is packed dirt. You sleep on a brick bed called a kang that's heated by a small fire underneath during winter months. In summer, you sleep on bamboo mats that do nothing to keep away the mosquitoes, fleas, and bedbugs that infest every corner of your dwelling. There's no privacy. Your entire family, parents, grandparents, siblings, possibly aunts and uncles, shares this single room. You hear everything. You see everything. The concept of personal space doesn't exist. You've never been alone in your entire life, not for a single moment. The hierarchy extends beyond just class. Age determines everything. You don't speak unless spoken to by your elders. You don't eat until they've eaten. You don't sit until they've sat. Your opinions mean nothing. Your desires mean nothing. Filial piety, the Confucian principle of absolute obedience and respect toward parents and ancestors, isn't just encouraged. It's the foundational principle of society, enforced by law and custom. If your father tells you to marry someone, you marry them. If your mother tells you to work in the fields instead of studying, you work. Disobedience isn't teenage rebellion. It's a crime against the natural order of the universe, punishable by beating, exile, or worse. The state itself reinforces this hierarchy because a society where children obey parents is a society where subjects obey the emperor. And speaking of the emperor, he's not just your ruler. He's the Son of Heaven, the living mediator between the celestial realm and the mortal world. His authority is absolute because it's divinely ordained. When he speaks, his words are the will of heaven itself. When he's displeased, the very cosmos is out of balance. You'll never see the Emperor. You'll never even get close to anyone who's seen the Emperor. You're separated from imperial power by layers upon layers of bureaucracy, local magistrates, prefectural governors, provincial administrators, and the vast machinery of the imperial examination system that produces the scholar officials who actually run the empire. But you'll feel the Emperor's presence every day, in the taxes you pay, in the laws you follow, in the corvée labour, forced unpaid work on government projects, that takes you away from your fields for weeks or months at a time to build roads, repair dikes, or construct sections of the Great Wall with your own hands and back. Your identity is collective, not individual. You're not you. You're a member of your family, your clan, your village. If you commit a crime, your entire family can be punished. If your neighbour commits a crime, and you don't report it, you can be punished. The system of mutual responsibility means everyone watches everyone else, creating a surveillance state that operates through social pressure rather than secret police. Women have it even worse. If you're female, you're governed by the 3 obediences. Obey your father before marriage, obey your husband after marriage, obey your son in widowhood. You have no legal standing. You can't own property. You can't initiate divorce. Your husband can take concubines, multiple concubines, and you're expected to smile and manage the household harmony. If you're born into the gentry class, life is better materially, but no less constrained. You have more food, better clothes, a proper house with multiple rooms, but the pressure is suffocating. Your family status depends on your performance in the imperial examinations. Starting around age 5 or 6, you begin memorizing the Confucian classics, hundreds of thousands of characters that you must know perfectly, be able to recite flawlessly, and understand well enough to write elaborate essays analyzing their meanings. You study from dawn until late into the night. Your childhood is spent in a small room with a tutor who hits you with a bamboo rod when you make mistakes. You have no friends outside of your study group. You don't play, you don't explore. You memorize, practice calligraphy, and prepare for examinations that will determine whether your family rises or falls in social standing. The first level of examinations happens at the county level. If you pass, you're a shangyuan, a licentiate, which grants you certain legal privileges and exempts you from corvée labour. But only about 1 to 2% of candidates pass. If you fail, you try again, and again, and again. Men spend decades attempting these examinations, growing old in the pursuit of a degree that might never come. If you somehow pass the county level, you face the provincial examinations, then the metropolitan examinations in Beijing. Then, if you're extraordinarily fortunate and talented, the palace examinations in front of the emperor himself. The pressure has driven men to madness, suicide, and nervous collapse. Entire family fortunes have been spent tutoring a single son in hopes that he'll pass and bring glory to the family name. This is your world now, rigid, hierarchical, unforgiving. Every aspect of life is governed by rules written centuries before you were born, and changing them is about as likely as changing the path of the Yellow River with your bare hands. You don't get to choose your destiny. Your destiny chose you before you existed, and we haven't even talked about the actual physical challenges of survival yet. That's coming next. Chapter 2. The Daily Grind. Labour that breaks bodies and spirits. Let's talk about your typical day as a peasant farmer in Imperial China, because typical is going to mean something very different than you're imagining. You wake before dawn, Not because you have an alarm clock, but because your body has been conditioned by years of agricultural labour to respond to the first hints of light. There's no coffee, no breakfast waiting for you. You might get some congee, rice porridge so watery you can see your reflection in it, if there's enough grain. During lean times, you get hot water with maybe some vegetable scraps floating in it. Your first task is heading to the fields, if you're working rice paddies, which most peasants in southern China were. You're wading into water that's been standing for days or weeks. This water is a biological soup of human waste, used as fertilizer, animal waste, decomposing plant matter, and parasites. Lots and lots of parasites. Schistosomiasis, also called snail fever, is endemic in these rice paddies. The parasite enters through your skin while you're working in the water, travels through your bloodstream, and sets up shop in your intestines or bladder. The symptoms start subtle: fatigue, fever, abdominal pain. But over months and years, the parasite causes internal scarring, organ damage, and eventually death. Nearly everyone who works rice paddies has some level of parasitic infection. You're constantly tired, constantly sick, constantly in pain. But you keep working, because stopping means starving. Your tools are primitive by modern standards. A wooden plough, maybe pulled by an ox, if your family can afford one. More likely you're pulling the plough yourself, or your wife is, bent over at an angle that destroys your lower back over time. The Chinese plough is lighter than European versions, better suited for the wet rice paddies, but it still requires enormous physical effort to operate. You work in the burning sun with no sunscreen, no protective clothing beyond your basic hemp garments, and a conical bamboo hat that provides minimal shade. The UV radiation beats down on you relentlessly. Your skin becomes dark, leathery, weathered, markers of the peasant class that immediately identify your social status. Fair skin is a sign of wealth because it means you don't have to work outdoors. The physical labour is relentless. Transplanting rice seedlings means bending over at the waist for hours at a time, your hands in water, your back screaming in agony. You do this for days during planting season. Your vertebrae compress. Your joints swell. By the time you're 30, you move like someone twice that age. During harvest season, you're cutting rice stalks with a sickle, bundling them, hauling them to threshing areas. Your hands develop calluses on top of calluses. Your fingernails crack and split. Your shoulders feel like they're carrying stones even when you're not carrying anything. And this is if you're lucky enough to be working your own crops. Remember, you don't own this land. You're a tenant farmer, which means after you harvest everything, after you've broken your back for months, you give half or more to the landlord. What's left has to feed your family for the entire year, pay taxes to the government, and provide enough seed for next year's planting. The math never quite works out. You're always in deficit, always owing someone something: the landlord, the tax collector, the grain merchant who loaned you seed on credit. Debt is the chains that keep you locked in place generation after generation, and we haven't even discussed the weather. Agriculture in Imperial China was entirely dependent on monsoon patterns and river systems that flooded regularly. The Yellow River wasn't called China's sorrow for nothing. It flooded catastrophically every few decades, killing hundreds of thousands of people, destroying entire villages, turning productive farmland into devastated wasteland. When flooding comes, you lose everything. Your crops drown in the fields, your home washes away, your stored grain is ruined, your livestock dies, and there's no insurance, no government relief program, no safety net. You're on your own. Drought is equally devastating. When the rains don't come, your crops wither, the soil cracks, your irrigation ponds dry up. You watch your family's survival shrivel and die in the fields, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can pray to the gods, make offerings at local temples, but ultimately, You're at the mercy of weather patterns you can't control or even understand. During famine years, and these happened regularly throughout Imperial China's history, you eat things that aren't food. Tree bark, grass, clay mixed with water to fill your stomach with something, anything, even though it provides no nutrition. Parents make impossible decisions about which children to feed. Infanticide spikes during famines, particularly of daughters, because sons are valued more highly for continuing the family line and providing labour. If you're in northern China, you're dealing with different crops but similar challenges. Millet, wheat, soybeans, these are your staples. The soil is different, the climate is harsher, and the physical labour is just as brutal. Winter in northern China is bitterly cold, and your rammed earth house provides minimal insulation. You burn whatever you can find for heat: dried grass, crop stubble, animal dung. The smoke has nowhere to go except through a hole in the roof, so you're constantly breathing in smoke, damaging your lungs, developing respiratory problems that never quite go away. Your diet is monotonous to the point of torture. Rice or millet as your base, maybe some pickled vegetables if you're fortunate. Protein is a luxury. Meat might appear on your table a few times a year during festivals. Fish if you live near water. Tofu and other soy products provide some protein, but you're perpetually on the edge of malnutrition. Vitamin deficiencies cause predictable problems. Beriberi from lack of thiamine makes your limbs swell and your heart weak. Scurvy from lack of vitamin C makes your gums bleed and your teeth fall out. Night blindness from lack of vitamin A makes it dangerous to move around after dark. But you don't know about vitamins. You just know that your body is falling apart and there's nothing you can do about it. The work is endless. During planting season and harvest season, you work from before dawn until after dark. During the slower seasons, you're repairing tools, maintaining irrigation systems, processing crops, preparing for the next season. There's no weekend. There are some festival days throughout the year. Chinese New Year, the Qingming Festival, the Mid-Autumn Festival. But even these involve work preparing special foods and making offerings. Your life is measured in harvests. If you're very fortunate, you might see 40 or 50 harvests before you die. Most people see fewer. Infant mortality is staggering. Roughly 1 in 3 children dies before age 5 from disease, malnutrition or accidents. If you survive childhood, you might make it to your 50s or 60s, but your body will be worn out decades before that. This is the daily grind. This is what 90% of Imperial China's population experienced generation after generation. The romanticized version of ancient China you see in movies, the martial arts masters, the wise philosophers, the elegant courts, that existed for maybe 5% of the population. For everyone else, life was rice paddies and parasites, debt and drought, labour that never ended and rewards that never quite materialized. And you're living it now, every single day, for the rest of your life. Chapter 3. Medicine and Mortality. When getting sick means dying. You wake up one morning with a fever. Your head is pounding, your body aches, and you're shivering despite the summer heat. In the modern world, you'd take some ibuprofen, drink fluids, maybe see a doctor if it persists. In Imperial China, you've just entered a lottery where death is a very real possibility. Medical understanding in Imperial China was sophisticated in some ways. Traditional Chinese medicine had developed complex theories about qi, meridians, yin and yang, the 5 elements. Herbal remedies had been refined over centuries. Acupuncture existed as a therapeutic practice. But here's the brutal truth. When it came to infectious diseases, traumatic injuries or surgical problems, you were operating in the dark with tools that ranged from sometimes helpful to actively making things worse. Let's start with the basics. You're a peasant, which means you can't afford a real doctor. The educated, physicians who studied classical medical texts and understood complex diagnostic techniques. They serve the wealthy. You get the village herbalist if you're lucky, or more likely you get folk remedies passed down through generations that may or may not have any actual medical value. Your fever continues. Someone suggests you've been possessed by evil spirits, so your family brings in a local shaman or Taoist priest to perform an exorcism. This involves burning incense, chanting sutras, writing talismans in red ink that you're supposed to burn and mix with water to drink. The ashes taste terrible, but you drink them because what else are you going to do? The fever persists. Now the theory shifts. Maybe your QE is imbalanced. Someone performs cupping, placing heated glass cups on your back that create suction, supposedly drawing out bad qi. This leaves circular bruises all over your skin, but doesn't actually address the bacterial infection that's making you sick. If you're really fortunate and your family can scrape together some money, you might see an actual physician. He takes your pulse, not just your heart rate, but what traditional Chinese medicine calls the 28 pulses, each supposedly indicating different conditions. He examines your tongue, asks about your symptoms, and determines that you have an excess of heat in your body. The prescription: herbal medicine. Some of these herbs actually have anti-inflammatory or mild antibacterial properties. Others do nothing. Some might actually make you worse. The physician grinds up various dried plants, animal parts, and minerals into a powder that you boil into a tea so bitter you can barely force it down. But here's the thing. You probably have typhoid fever or dysentery, both common in Imperial China due to contaminated water. Herbal tea isn't going to cure a serious bacterial infection. What you need is antibiotics, IV fluids, and supportive care. What you get is increasingly desperate remedies as your condition deteriorates. Your family is spending money they don't have on these treatments. They're going into debt to the landlord, borrowing from relatives, selling whatever possessions they can spare. And you're getting worse. The fever spikes higher. You're barely conscious. You're losing control of your bowels, becoming dehydrated, your body consuming itself. If you're male and the eldest son, your family might bankrupt themselves trying to save you, because losing you means losing the primary labourer and the one who will continue the family line. If you're female or a younger child, the calculations are more brutal. At some point, the family has to decide whether to keep spending resources on someone who might not survive anyway, or to preserve those resources for the survivors. Let's say you survive this bout of illness. You're lucky, your immune system is strong, or the disease runs its course. But the experience has weakened you permanently. You've lost weight. You can't afford to lose. Your recovery takes weeks or months, during which you can't work, putting the family further into debt. Now let's talk about childbirth, because if you're female, this is one of the most dangerous things you'll experience in Imperial China. There are no hospitals, no sterile delivery rooms, no trained obstetricians. When you go into labour, you're attended by a midwife, usually an older woman with experience but no formal training. She's delivered babies before, but she's also seen plenty of women and infants die, and there wasn't much she could do about it. You give birth at home, in the same room where your family lives. Privacy is minimal. The midwife's tools are her hands, some herbs to supposedly ease labour pains, and prayers to the goddess of childbirth. If everything goes normally, baby in the right position, no complications, you might be fine. But if things go wrong, you're in serious trouble. Breech birth, the midwife tries to turn the baby manually, which is excruciating and often fails. Placental complications, hemorrhaging, eclampsia, these are death sentences. The maternal mortality rate in Imperial China was somewhere between 1 to 2%, which might not sound that high until you realise that women often had 5, 6, 7 children or more. The odds catch up with you. And the babies. So many babies don't make it. Birth defects, premature birth, infections in the first few days of life. The infant mortality rate is crushing. You give birth knowing there's a very real chance this child won't see their first birthday. Some families don't even name their children until they've survived the first few months or even years, because the emotional devastation of losing a named child is too much to bear repeatedly. Let's talk about other common medical problems. Dental issues, for instance. You have no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss, no dentist. You clean your teeth by rinsing with water or chewing on willow twigs. Your diet is carbohydrate heavy, which promotes tooth decay. By your 20s, you probably have cavities. By your 30s, you're losing teeth to rot and gum disease. When a tooth really starts hurting, your options are limited. Someone might pull it using crude pliers with no anesthesia. You bite down on a cloth while they yank and twist until the tooth comes out, assuming it doesn't break off at the root. The pain is spectacular. The socket bleeds and might get infected, but at least the tooth is gone. Broken bones are another nightmare. If you break an arm or leg working in the fields, the village bone setter, if there is one, might splint it with bamboo and cloth. If they set it correctly and you're lucky, it heals. Often it heals crooked, leaving you with limited mobility and chronic pain. If the break is compound, bone sticking through skin, you're probably going to die from infection. There's no surgery to fix it, no antibiotics to prevent sepsis. The wound festers, the flesh around it turns black, and eventually the infection kills you. Parasites are a constant companion. We mentioned schistosomiasis from the rice paddies, but that's just one of many. Roundworms, hookworms, tapeworms, these set up residence in your intestines, stealing nutrients, causing anemia, abdominal pain, and malnutrition. You might literally be able to see worms in your stool, but there's not much you can do about it. Some herbal remedies have mild antiparasitic properties, but you're never completely free of them. Malaria is endemic in southern China. The mosquitoes that breed in rice paddies carry the parasite, and when they bite you, which happens constantly, you might contract it. The cyclical fevers, the chills, the devastating fatigue. Some people develop chronic malaria that flares up repeatedly throughout their lives. The only treatment is cinchona bark, quinine, if you can get it, which most peasants can't. Smallpox sweeps through villages, periodically killing or permanently disfiguring people. Your face becomes covered in pustules that eventually scab over, leaving deep, pitted scars. If you survive, you're immune, but you carry those scars for life. Variolation, deliberately infecting people with a mild form of smallpox to create immunity, was practiced in China centuries before Western vaccination, but it was risky and not widely available to peasants. Tuberculosis, dysentery, typhus, cholera. These diseases circulated constantly through the population. Living in close quarters with poor sanitation meant that when one person got sick, often the whole family did, sometimes the whole village. And then there's the medical practices that actively harm you. Bloodletting to balance humours. Mercury compounds used to treat various ailments that slowly poison you. Cauterization with hot irons for problems that don't require burning. Some practices in traditional Chinese medicine were genuinely helpful, but many were neutral at best or harmful at worst. The average life expectancy for peasants was somewhere in the 30s or 40s, not because humans are naturally short-lived. The wealthy who avoided manual labour, had better nutrition, and could afford medical care often lived into their 60s or 70s. But because the combination of malnutrition, disease, dangerous working conditions, and inadequate medical care meant most people simply didn't make it that long. You watched siblings die in childhood. You watched your mother die giving birth. You watched your father succumb to an infection from a minor wound. You watched neighbours waste away from diseases no one understood. Death was omnipresent, inevitable, and often random. And when you got sick, you faced it with folk remedies, desperate prayers, and the knowledge that your survival was more about luck than anything else. Modern medicine, antibiotics, vaccines, surgery, anesthesia, germ theory, all of that is centuries in your future. Right now, you're living in a world where a simple infection can kill you, where childbirth is a life-threatening event, where chronic pain is just something you learn to live with because there's no alternative. This is healthcare in Imperial China, and you're experiencing it firsthand. Chapter 4. The Weight of Tradition, Foot Binding and Gender Oppression. If you're female and born into certain social classes in Imperial China, particularly from the Song dynasty onward, you're going to experience one of the most disturbing cultural practices in human history. Foot binding. Let's be clear about what we're discussing here. This isn't just uncomfortable shoes or beauty standards that require effort. This is the deliberate breaking and reshaping of bones in young girls' feet to create what was considered the ideal feminine form, the 3-inch golden lotus. You're about 5 or 6 years old enough to remember what happens next for the rest of your life. Your mother or grandmother sits you down and explains that you're about to become beautiful, marriageable, a proper woman, but what they're really about to do is break your feet. The process starts with your feet being soaked in a mixture of herbs and animal blood to soften the tissue. Then your toes, all except the big toe, are curled under your foot, bent backward toward the heel. Cloth bindings are wrapped tightly around your foot, holding this unnatural position. The binding is then sewn in place so you can't remove it even if you wanted to. The pain is immediate and overwhelming. You're crying, screaming, begging them to stop. But they don't stop. This is love, they tell you. This is necessary. Unmarried women with natural feet are considered unmarriageable in many circles. They're servants, peasants, outcasts. You need bound feet to have any hope of a decent marriage. Over the following days, weeks and months, the bindings are progressively tightened. Your foot bones begin to break. Not in one dramatic moment, but gradually, micro-fractures turning into complete breaks. The arch of your foot collapses inward. Your toes, bent backward in their permanent curl, begin to atrophy. The binding cuts off circulation, and sometimes toes turn black and fall off. This is actually considered ideal. Fewer toes means a smaller foot. You struggle to walk. Every step is unsteady. Your weight shifted awkwardly as you rely on walls and furniture for balance. Your feet are almost always bound, rarely exposed, and when they are, the damage beneath is shocking. The skin is damaged and fragile. Toes are bent unnaturally, creating folds where illness easily takes hold. The enclosed, unventilated bindings trap moisture and heat, creating a persistent, unmistakable odour. Your mother checks the bindings often, tightening them further, forcing your feet into an ever smaller shape. If you attempt to loosen them yourself, you're punished. This goes on for years. The ideal bound foot is only 3 to 4 inches long, roughly the size of an adult thumb. Achieving this means forcing the body into a form it was never meant to assume. By adolescence, your feet are permanently altered. You walk with a distinctive swaying motion, later called the lotus gait, because normal balance is impossible. You can move only short distances before the pain becomes overwhelming. Running is out of the question. In an emergency, fire, flood, anything requiring speed, you are defenseless. But now you are considered marriageable. Your bound feet are viewed as alluring and refined, symbols of femininity and status. They signal that you were never expected to labour, that your family had the means to sacrifice your mobility for beauty. Men who idealize bound feet see you as desirable. A life defined by restricted movement, chronic discomfort, and dependence is now your future. The most disturbing truth is this: the practice is enforced by women who care for you. Your mother, grandmother, and aunts endured the same process. They believe, sincerely, that this suffering is necessary for your survival in a society where a woman's worth is tied almost entirely to marriage. Not all women experience foot binding. Peasant women who worked the land generally did not, because agricultural labour was impossible with severely altered feet. The Manchu rulers of the Qing dynasty prohibited the practice among their own people, but among Han Chinese families of the middle and upper classes, it became so entrenched that refusing to bind a daughter's feet was seen as condemning her to poverty and disgrace. This practice endured for nearly 1,000 years. 1,000 years of mothers reshaping their daughters' bodies because society demanded it. 1,000 years of women moving through life in constant pain, their independence taken from them in childhood, all in service of ideals created and enforced by a patriarchal system. Foot binding, however, was only one visible expression of a much deeper structure of control. As a woman, your life is governed by the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. You must obey your father before marriage, your husband after marriage, and your son if you become a widow. The 4 virtues define your behavior: moral purity, restrained speech, submissive conduct, and tireless domestic labor. If you receive any education, it centers on these expectations. You may learn basic literacy for household management or moral instruction, but broader intellectual pursuits are discouraged. There are no civil service exams for women. You cannot hold office, cannot own property independently, and cannot travel freely. Your marriage is arranged, often without your consent. You may not meet your husband until the wedding day. You are assessed like property. Your health, family background, and dowry weighed carefully. Your preferences are irrelevant. On your wedding day, dressed in red, you are carried to your husband's home and delivered into a household that now has legal authority over you. You do not return to your birth family. You are transferred formally and permanently. In this new home, you occupy the lowest position. Your mother-in-law controls your daily life. She assigns your tasks, scrutinizes your behavior, and can make your existence unbearable. Many daughters-in-law were treated as servants, constantly reminded that their only true value lay in producing sons. Your primary function is reproduction. Sons ensure the continuation of the family line. Daughters are seen as temporary dependents. If you fail to produce children, or only daughters, you may be sent away in disgrace, or replaced by concubines brought in to fulfill that role. Concubinage is legal and socially accepted among families who can afford it. As the primary wife, you are expected to tolerate and manage these women, overseeing their duties and raising their children as part of the household. Any expression of resentment is viewed as a moral failing. You have no recognized right to refuse your husband intimacy. The idea of consent within marriage does not exist. If you are mistreated, you have no meaningful legal protection. Divorce initiated by women is nearly impossible, while men may dismiss their wives for a wide range of reasons. Widowhood offers no refuge. In some families, widows are expected to remain chaste for life. Those who remarried, or were merely suspected of impropriety, could face intense pressure to end their own lives. Public monuments were erected to honor women who chose death over remarriage. If you are born into poverty, your fate may be worse. Some families sell young daughters into servitude. These girls live without freedom or legal protection, often enduring lifelong exploitation. Some are eventually married off. others remain in service indefinitely. In times of hardship, infant girls are sometimes abandoned or killed, viewed as burdens rather than blessings. This practice creates severe gender imbalances, leaving many men without partners, while wealthy households accumulate multiple wives and concubines. Your existence is defined by rigid rules that deny you autonomy. You are never fully recognized as an individual. You are a daughter, then a wife, then, if you succeed, a mother. Your worth exists only in relation to men. To resist this order is not merely disobedience, it is seen as rebellion against the universe itself. Confucian philosophy frames these hierarchies as natural and divinely sanctioned. To challenge them is to challenge heaven. This is what it means to live as a woman in Imperial China. The altered bodies, the arranged marriages, the absence of legal rights. It is not simply hardship. It is a system designed to strip personhood away, sustained for generations because it was believed to be the proper order of the world, and you are inside it. Every careful step, every act of submission, every part of yourself surrendered to tradition. This is your reality. Chapter 5. Crime and Punishment, the Fear of Imperial Justice. You've been accused of a crime. Whether you're guilty matters less than you'd expect. The justice system of Imperial China is built around one goal: confession. Perhaps you're accused of stealing grain. Someone claims to have seen you nearby. Maybe they simply wanted to accuse you. You're arrested by the magistrate's runners, agents of the court who rely on intimidation and corruption to do their work. You're taken to the county yamen, where the magistrate presides alone. There's no defense attorney, no jury, no assumption of innocence. The magistrate holds immense power over your fate. You're forced to kneel on the floor as he reviews the case. He may ignore you at first, making you wait. When he finally speaks, he already assumes guilt. Why else would you be here? Confession is the central form of proof. Denial only prolongs the process. When you refuse to confess, the magistrate authorizes coercive measures that are legal and regulated under imperial law. These methods are not intended to kill you, but to break your resistance. The initial punishment may involve controlled beatings meant to inflict pain without immediately disabling you. If that fails, pressure techniques are applied to sensitive parts of the body, designed to overwhelm your ability to endure. Other methods force you into painful positions for extended periods, straining joints and muscles. Some involve extreme physical discomfort intended to exhaust both body and will. Eventually you comply. Everyone does. You confess, truthfully or not. The coercion stops, but the consequences begin. Punishments range from additional corporal punishment to years of forced labor on government projects. Many do not survive these sentences. For serious crimes, penalties are designed to instill fear across society. Permanent markings may be applied to identify you as a criminal for life. In extreme cases, physical mutilation is used as both punishment and warning. Justice in Imperial China is not about determining truth as we understand it today. It is about maintaining order through fear, obedience, and visible consequences. And once you enter this system, there is no easy way out. For capital crimes, execution methods varied in their severity to match the crime's seriousness. Beheading was the standard execution method, relatively quick, though not always clean. The executioner's skill varied, and sometimes it took multiple blows to sever the head. But for particularly serious crimes, treason, patricide, plotting to overthrow the emperor, the punishments were designed to be as horrific as possible. Lingqi, sometimes called death by 1,000 cuts, involved slowly cutting pieces of flesh from the condemned person's body over an extended period. The process was carefully regulated to ensure the person didn't die too quickly. It could take hours. The goal was maximum suffering as a deterrent to others. Family members could be punished for your crimes under the principle of collective responsibility. If you committed treason, your entire family, parents, siblings, children, might be executed or enslaved. The logic was that families should police their own members, and if they failed to prevent crimes, they shared in the guilt. Exile was another punishment, sending convicted criminals to remote frontier regions. This was sometimes considered worse than death, because you were separated from your family and ancestral lands, sent to harsh environments with hostile populations, and expected to survive on your own. The journey itself was dangerous, and many exiles died before reaching their destinations. The legal system also incorporated different standards for different classes. If you were a low-ranking peasant who killed a member of the gentry, your punishment would be severe, likely execution. But if a member of the gentry killed you, they might face much lighter punishment, or might avoid punishment entirely through their connections and influence. Corruption was endemic. Magistrates supplemented their official salaries through customary fees and bribes. If you had money, you could sometimes buy your way out of trouble or at least reduce your punishment. If you were poor, you faced the full weight of the system with no resources to defend yourself. There was an appeals process theoretically. You could appeal to higher courts, eventually all the way to the emperor. But appeals cost money and time. Most people couldn't afford to appeal, and even if they could, higher courts generally deferred to the original magistrate's judgment, unless there were obvious procedural violations. The philosophy underlying this system was fundamentally different from modern Western justice. The goal wasn't primarily to determine guilt or innocence through adversarial proceedings. It was to maintain social order through fear, and to extract confessions that reinforced the magistrate's authority. Truth was important, but order was paramount. You learned quickly in Imperial China that the law was not your friend. It was a tool of social control, wielded by those in power against those without power. Your best strategy was to never come to the attention of the authorities, to settle disputes privately, to endure injustices rather than seek legal remedy, because engaging with the legal system meant risking outcomes that could destroy your life, even if you were innocent. And if you were guilty, well, the punishment was designed to be so severe, so terrifying, that others would think twice before committing similar crimes. Your suffering became a public spectacle, a lesson written in pain and blood for everyone to see. This is justice in Imperial China, and if you've been accused of something, you're experiencing it firsthand right now. Chapter 6. The Forbidden City, where power means paranoia. You're standing outside the walls of the Forbidden City in Beijing, the heart of imperial power, and you need to understand something fundamental. You will never, ever enter these walls unless you're extraordinarily privileged or extraordinarily unfortunate. This massive complex of nearly 1,000 buildings is home to the emperor and his court, and it's literally forbidden to ordinary people like you. But let's imagine, for a moment, that you're one of the few who does get inside. Maybe you're a eunuch, a concubine, a high-ranking official, or a servant. Your life behind these vermilion walls is nothing like you'd imagine. This isn't a paradise of luxury and ease. It's a pressure cooker of intrigue, paranoia, and political maneuvering, where a single mistake can mean death. If you're a eunuch, a castrated man who serves in the imperial household, you've already paid a terrible price for entry. Castration in Imperial China wasn't a clean surgical procedure. You went to a specialist, paid a fee you probably couldn't afford, and endured having your penis and testicles removed with a curved blade. No anesthesia, no sterile technique. You were conscious for the entire procedure. The wound was cauterized with hot oil or left to heal on its own. You couldn't urinate for days because a plug was inserted to keep the urethra from sealing shut. The pain was indescribable. Many men died from blood loss, infection or shock. Those who survived faced a lifetime of medical complications, difficulty urinating, incontinence, infections. Why would anyone choose this? Because eunuchs were the only men besides the emperor allowed in the inner court where the imperial women lived. They could rise to positions of enormous power and wealth if they were clever and lucky. Some eunuchs became trusted advisors to emperors, controlling access to the throne and influencing policy. But most remained servants, cleaning chambers, carrying messages, performing menial tasks, while nursing the physical and psychological trauma of their mutilation. The hierarchy among eunuchs was rigid and ruthless. Senior eunuchs lorded over junior ones, demanding bribes and kickbacks. Competition for the emperor's favour was intense. Eunuchs formed factions, allied with concubines, and officials plotted against rivals. Getting on the wrong side of a powerful eunuch could mean being sent to the most degrading tasks, or worse, being beaten, tortured, or killed with impunity. If you're one of the emperor's concubines, you're living in what's essentially a gilded cage. You were selected for your beauty, usually in your early teens, taken from your family and brought to the Forbidden City. You're given luxurious rooms, fine clothes, servants of your own. But you're also a prisoner. You can't leave the Forbidden City. You can't communicate freely with your family outside. Your entire existence revolves around the possibility that the Emperor might summon you to his bed. If he does, and if you please him, your status rises. If you bore him a son who becomes the crown prince, you might become the most powerful woman in China. But those are enormous ifs. Most concubines never see the emperor more than a handful of times. They spend their lives in the inner palace, competing with dozens or even hundreds of other women for attention, engaging in petty politics, forming alliances, and trying to survive in an environment of constant psychological warfare. Poisoning was a real concern. Rivals might try to eliminate you if you seemed to be gaining favour. Food tasters existed for a reason. You couldn't trust anyone completely, not even your own servants, because they might be spying for someone else. If you failed to produce a son, or if you fell out of favour, you might spend decades in the inner palace essentially forgotten. When the emperor died, if his successor didn't want to keep you around, you might be moved to a remote palace to live out your life in obscurity. Some concubines committed suicide rather than face this fate. Others simply endured, growing old in luxurious imprisonment. If you're a high-ranking official attending court, you live in constant fear of making a mistake. The emperor sits on his dragon throne, elevated above everyone else, and you prostrate yourself on the ground when addressing him. You don't speak unless spoken to. You don't look directly at him. You certainly don't contradict him. Court etiquette is extraordinarily complex. Every movement, every phrase, every gesture is governed by rules that took years to learn. One wrong move, using an improper form of address, standing when you should kneel, speaking out of turn, could be interpreted as disrespect, or worse, treason. And the emperor is not just a political leader. He's the Son of Heaven, a semi-divine figure whose authority comes from the mandate of heaven itself. To oppose him isn't just political disagreement, it's cosmic rebellion. Emperors could and did execute officials for minor offences or perceived slights. You might give the emperor advice that he doesn't want to hear, and the next day you're under arrest for sedition. Factionalism at court was intense. Officials aligned with different princes, different ideological schools, different regional interests. These factions competed for power, using any means necessary: slander, bribery, fabricated evidence, assassination. You had to choose your allies carefully, but you also had to be ready to abandon them if they fell out of favour. The examination system that got you here, the years of study, The successful passage of multiple levels of testing means you're extraordinarily educated and intelligent, but that doesn't protect you from the capriciousness of imperial power. Some of the most brilliant minds in Chinese history ended up executed or exiled because they angered the wrong person at the wrong time. Censors, officials whose job was to criticize government policy and monitor other officials, lived particularly dangerous lives. They were expected to speak truth to power, but emperors didn't always appreciate having their failures pointed out. Some censors became legendary for their courage in criticizing emperors, knowing it might cost them their lives. Others learned to be strategic, picking battles carefully, phrasing criticism in ways that allowed emperors to save face. The workday for officials was grueling. You rose before dawn to prepare for morning audiences. Court sessions could last for hours, standing in formal robes that weighed heavily in summer heat. After court, there was administrative work, reading reports, writing memorials, managing your assigned duties. You might not return home until after dark, and you couldn't afford to look weak or tired. Officials who showed signs of illness or incompetence were quickly replaced. The competition for positions was fierce, thousands of degree holders competing for a limited number of posts. If you lost your position, you lost your salary, your status, your ability to support your family. Living in Beijing itself, near the center of power, was expensive. Food, housing, servants, all cost more than in provincial areas. Your official salary often wasn't enough, which meant you had to supplement it through customary fees, essentially legalized corruption, or personal wealth. If you didn't have family money, you were always on the edge financially despite your high status. The emperor himself lived the most paradoxical life of anyone in the Forbidden City. He had absolute power in theory, but in practice he was constrained by tradition, bureaucracy, and the need to maintain the mandate of heaven. He was surrounded by people who wanted something from him, officials seeking promotion, family members seeking favor, eunuchs seeking influence. Young emperors often came to the throne as children and were controlled by regents, usually their mothers or senior officials. Even adult emperors found their power limited by the enormous bureaucracy they theoretically controlled. Reforms required navigating complex political coalitions. Opposing the consensus of senior officials was risky. It could lead to political paralysis, or worse, officials conspiring to replace you. Some emperors retreated into the pleasures available to them. The imperial gardens, the hundreds of concubines, elaborate banquets, hunting trips. This seemed like a life of luxury, but it was also profoundly isolating. The emperor couldn't have real friends, people who valued him for himself rather than his position. Everyone wanted something. Everyone was performing for him. Genuine human connection was nearly impossible. Other emperors threw themselves into governance, working exhausting hours trying to manage an empire of hundreds of millions of people. But the information reaching them was filtered through layers of bureaucracy. Reports were sanitized, problems minimized, failures blamed on subordinates. It was difficult to know what was really happening in the empire beyond the palace walls, and there was always the possibility of overthrow. Dynasties rose and fell. Emperors were deposed, assassinated, forced to abdicate. The mandate of heaven was supposedly permanent, but in practice it lasted only as long as you could maintain order, prosperity, and military strength. Natural disasters, famines, military defeats, these were interpreted as signs that heaven had withdrawn its favor. This is life in the Forbidden City. Behind the magnificent architecture and elaborate ceremonies, it's a world of constant stress, limited freedom, and mortal danger. The emperor lives in a golden prison. The officials compete in a game where losing means death. The concubines age in beautiful isolation. The eunuchs serve masters who see them as less than fully human. and you're part of this system now, whether as eunuch, concubine, official or servant. The walls that keep ordinary people out also keep you in. Welcome to the center of power. Try not to get yourself killed. Chapter 7. War and Conscription, when the Emperor needs soldiers. You're working in your field when the conscription notice arrives. The Emperor needs soldiers for a campaign against northern nomads, or to suppress a rebellion in a distant province, or to defend the frontier against invasion. The specific reason doesn't matter much to you. What matters is that you've been selected to serve, and refusing isn't an option. Military service in Imperial China was something peasants dreaded. The wealthy could often buy their way out, hiring substitutes to serve in their place. But you don't have that kind of money. You're going to war. You have perhaps a week to settle your affairs. You need to find someone to work your fields, maybe a younger brother or cousin. Your wife will have to manage the household alone, which means she'll be doing both her work and yours. Your children might go hungry if the harvest fails. But none of this matters to the imperial bureaucracy. You've been selected, and you're going. The assembly point is the county seat. You arrive to find hundreds of other conscripts, all looking as miserable as you feel. Most are peasants like you, pulled from their farms and families. Some are criminals, given the choice between military service and punishment. A few are volunteers, usually desperate men with nothing to lose. You're issued equipment, though issued is generous. You get a basic uniform of coarse cloth, canvas shoes that won't last a month of marching, and weapons that depend on your unit assignment. If you're lucky, you get a decent spear and maybe some padded armor. If you're unlucky, you get a farming implement converted into a weapon and nothing for protection. Training is minimal. They show you how to hold your weapon, how to march in formation, basic commands. You practice for a few days, maybe a week, then you're marching out, part of a column of conscripts heading toward whatever conflict needs bodies to throw at it. The march itself is brutal. You walk 20 or more miles a day, carrying your equipment, often without adequate food or water. The supply system is supposed to provide for you, but corruption means that supplies often don't arrive late, or arrive in such poor condition they're unusable. You're eating mouldy grain, drinking questionable water, sleeping on the ground. Your canvas shoes fall apart within weeks. You're marching barefoot or wrapping your feet in rags. Your feet blister, the blisters pop and get infected, but you keep marching because falling behind means being left to die or being beaten for slowing the column. Disease spreads through the army like wildfire. Dysentery, typhus, cholera, these kill more soldiers than combat ever will. You're living in close quarters with thousands of other men, all of you unwashed, many of you sick. The latrines are inadequate pits that overflow. The water sources are contaminated. Half your unit is sick at any given time. When you finally reach the frontier or the battlefield, the reality of military life becomes even clearer. You're not a valued soldier being sent into glorious combat. You're expendable. You're a body to fill a spot in the battle line, and whether you live or die is of minimal concern to the commanders who view you as a statistic. If you're facing nomadic cavalry, Mongols, Xiongnu, various steppe peoples who've raided China for millennia, you're in serious trouble. These warriors have been riding horses and shooting bows since childhood. They're mobile, skilled, and experienced. You're a peasant farmer with a few weeks of training holding a spear. The nomads use tactics you can't counter effectively. They raid, feinting attacks, drawing your forces out of position, then wheeling away before you can engage. When they do commit to battle, they use composite bows to rain arrows on your formation from a distance you can't reach with your weapons. Your padded armor, if you have any, offers minimal protection against their arrows at close range. If you're part of an infantry square trying to hold against a cavalry charge, you experience pure terror. The ground shakes as hundreds of horses thunder toward your position. You've been told to hold the line, to keep your spear pointed outward, to not break formation. But everything in your body is screaming at you to run. The impact is chaos. Horses crash into the spear line. Some are impaled and go down, crushing men beneath them. Others break through and riders are slashing with swords, trampling men under hoof. You're jabbing with your spear at anything that moves, hearing screaming all around you, unable to see more than a few feet in any direction because of the dust and press of bodies. If you survive the initial clash, if your line holds, the cavalry might withdraw and regroup. But they'll come again, and again. They have the mobility to choose when and where to fight. You're stuck, holding position, exhausted, watching your comrades die, knowing the next charge might be the one that breaks your line and kills you. If you're besieging a city or defending a fortress, you face different nightmares. Siege warfare in Imperial China could last for months or even years. You're camped outside city walls, trying to survive on inadequate supplies while defenders rain arrows, rocks, and burning oil down on anyone who gets too close. When the assault comes, you're expected to charge the walls carrying scaling ladders or pushing siege towers. Defenders drop stones on your head, pour boiling water on you, shoot at you from protected positions. The ladders are unstable and crowded. Men fall screaming to their deaths. Those who reach the top of the wall face defenders fighting with the desperation of people protecting their homes. If you're defending a city under siege, you're trapped. The food runs out gradually. First you're on reduced rations. Then you're eating horses, rats, leather, anything with calories. People start dying of starvation. Disease spreads because sanitation breaks down when the city is overcrowded with refugees and soldiers. When a city finally falls, whether you're attacking or defending, the aftermath is horrific. The traditional 3 days of pillage means exactly what it sounds like. Soldiers are given free rein to loot, rape, and kill. This is their payment for the hardships of the campaign. If you're a defender and the city falls, your survival depends on luck and whether you can hide somewhere attackers don't find you. But let's say you survive. You fought your campaign, the war ends or you're rotated out, and you're discharged. The journey home is just as dangerous as the journey out, more so, because you're travelling with whatever loot you manage to acquire, making you a target for bandits. If you make it home, you're changed. You've seen and done things that will haunt you forever. You've killed people. You've watched friends die in horrible ways. You've endured hardships that broke some men completely. And there's no support system waiting for you. No veterans' benefits. No psychological counselling. No compensation beyond the minimal pay you received during service. Your farm has probably suffered in your absence. Maybe your family managed to keep it going. Maybe not. You might come home to find that debt collectors have taken everything because your wife couldn't pay the taxes without your labour. Or you might find your family dead from disease or famine that struck while you were away. The emperor needed soldiers, and you were selected. Your life was disrupted, your safety endangered, your psychological health shattered, all in service of imperial objectives that have nothing to do with you personally. This is conscription in Imperial China. You don't get thanked for your service. You don't get a parade. You get sent home and expected to pick up your life where you left off, as if the trauma and time lost don't matter. And if the emperor needs soldiers again in a few years, you might be selected again. The cycle continues until you're too old to serve, or until you die in service, or until you're maimed badly enough that you're no longer useful. This is what it means to be a soldier in Imperial China. Not glory, not honour, just survival, trauma, and the hope that you might make it home alive. Chapter 8. Natural disasters, when heaven itself turns against you. You're sleeping when the earthquake hits. One moment you're dreaming, the next the ground is heaving like ocean waves, and the rammed earth walls of your house are cracking and collapsing. Natural disasters in Imperial China weren't just dangerous events, they were interpreted as signs from heaven. When earthquakes struck, when floods devastated provinces, when droughts turned farmland to dust, these were seen as indicators that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven. The cosmic order was disturbed, and someone needed to answer for it. But philosophical interpretations don't help you when your house is collapsing on top of you. The earthquake lasts maybe a minute, though it feels like an eternity. The beam supporting your roof crashes down. You barely avoid being crushed. Your family is screaming in the darkness, disoriented, terrified. When the shaking finally stops, you emerge into chaos. Your village looks like it's been attacked by giants. Houses have collapsed into piles of earth and broken wood. The village temple's roof has caved in. You can hear people crying for help, trapped under rubble. Some villagers are already dead, crushed in their sleep. But you can't stop to help everyone because the earthquake has created a new problem. Fire. Someone's cooking fire has spread to the collapsed remains of their house, and with everything dry and wooden, the flames are spreading quickly. You and the other survivors form a bucket brigade, trying to contain the fire, but water is scarce and the fire moves faster than you can fight it. Within hours, half the village is burned. The earthquake killed dozens, the fire killed dozens more. Bodies are being pulled from the rubble, some whole, some crushed beyond recognition. You're looking for your neighbours, your friends, hoping they survived, finding some alive and some not. And this is just the immediate aftermath. The real suffering is just beginning. Your food stores were in your house. They're buried under rubble now, contaminated with dirt and debris. The communal granary partially collapsed. Some grain is salvageable, but much of it is ruined. The irrigation systems that fed your fields are broken. The village well has been contaminated with debris. You need to rebuild, but you've lost your tools. You've lost your building materials. You've lost the savings you had carefully accumulated. And you need to do all of this while still growing food, because taxes are still due, and landlords still expect their share of the harvest. The government response is slow and inadequate. Maybe relief supplies arrive eventually, some grain, some tools, some building materials, but they're never enough, and much of what's sent gets stolen by corrupt officials along the way. The emperor might reduce taxes for earthquake-affected areas, or he might not. Either way, you're largely on your own. Now let's talk about floods, because these were even more devastating and far more common. The Yellow River floods on average every few years, with catastrophic floods happening every few decades. When the great floods come, they're apocalyptic. The river breaks through its levees, and millions of cubic meters of water surge across the North China Plain, drowning everything in its path. You see the water coming. Maybe you have a few hours warning, maybe less. You grab what you can carry and run. Your crops are still in the field, but you abandon them. Your house will be underwater soon, but you can't save it. You're running with your family and whatever possessions you can grab, joining thousands of other refugees fleeing the flood. The water moves faster than you'd think. It's not a gentle rise. It's a wall of water that sweeps away everything. Houses, livestock, people who couldn't run fast enough. Trees are uprooted. Entire villages disappear under the flood. You make it to high ground, barely ahead of the water. You watch as your home, your fields, everything you've worked your entire life to build, vanishes under muddy water. The flood spreads for miles, creating an inland sea where farmland used to be. Now you're a refugee. You're camped on high ground with thousands of other displaced people. You have whatever you carried with you and nothing else. No shelter beyond what you can improvise. No food beyond what you grabbed. No clean water because the flood has contaminated everything. Disease follows floods like a shadow. Cholera spreads through refugee camps as people drink contaminated water. Typhoid, dysentery, various parasitic infections. These kill people who survive the flood itself. Bodies of humans and animals floating in the flood water are decomposing, creating a soup of pathogens. You're starving. The grain you were supposed to harvest is underwater and ruined. Your food stores are gone. Government relief is supposed to come, but it's slow and inadequate. Refugees are competing for limited resources. Fights break out. Some people resort to theft, some resort to worse. The flood might last for weeks before the water finally recedes. When it does, you discover that your farm is covered in a thick layer of mud and silt. This silt is actually good for the soil eventually, but right now it's buried your fields. You need to clear it, plant new crops, and somehow survive until the next harvest, months away. But you have no seed grain. You have no tools. You have no money to buy these things because you lost everything in the flood. You go into debt to the landlord or a merchant, borrowing at interest rates that guarantee you'll be paying off this debt for years, maybe for the rest of your life. And floods create cascading problems. The Yellow River's course sometimes changes completely after major floods, abandoning its old channel and cutting a new one. This means villages that were along the river suddenly aren't anymore. Their access to water and transportation is gone. Other villages that weren't along the river suddenly are, dealing with flooding they never had to manage before. Droughts are equally devastating but slower. You watch the rain fail to come. The monsoon season arrives, but the rains don't. Your crops wither in the fields. The irrigation ponds dry up. The wells drop lower and lower until they're producing just a trickle. You try to keep your crops alive with whatever water you can find, but it's not enough. The plants turn brown and die. You watch your family's survival literally drying up in front of you. Famine follows drought. First you're on reduced rations, eating less each day to make your stored grain last. Then you're eating things that aren't really food. Grass, tree bark, dirt mixed with water to fill your stomach even though it provides no nutrition. Your children are crying from hunger, and there's nothing you can do. Some people sell their land to buy food, becoming landless labourers. Some sell their children, sending them to wealthier families as servants, because at least there they might be fed. Some simply abandon their homes and become refugees, wandering toward regions where the drought isn't as severe, competing with thousands of other refugees for whatever resources exist. During severe droughts, cannibalism happens. It's not talked about openly, but it happens. People become desperate enough to eat the dead, or worse. The social order breaks down when everyone is starving. Moral principles mean less when your children are dying of hunger. And through all of this, earthquakes, floods, droughts, famines, the philosophical interpretation remains. These disasters are signs that heaven is displeased. The emperor performs elaborate ceremonies to appease heaven, sometimes even issuing self-critical edicts acknowledging his failures. But these rituals don't rebuild your house, don't restore your crops, don't bring back your family members who died. You pray to local gods, make offerings at temples, do everything you're supposed to do religiously, but the disasters keep coming because you live in a world without scientific understanding of seismology, hydrology, or meteorology. You can't predict earthquakes. You can't control rivers effectively. You can't make it rain. You're at the mercy of forces you can't understand or control. This is life in Imperial China when natural disasters strike. No emergency services, no insurance, no systematic relief beyond what local officials might provide if they're competent and not corrupt. You survive through luck, through the help of relatives and neighbours who are barely surviving themselves, and through sheer stubborn refusal to die. And when you've rebuilt from one disaster, when you've finally gotten back on your feet, there's always the possibility that the next earthquake, the next flood, the next drought is just around the corner. Living in Imperial China means living with the constant awareness that nature can destroy everything you have at any moment, and there's almost nothing you can do about it except endure and rebuild. Chapter 9. Superstition, Religion, and the Spirit World. You wake up sick. Not just regular sick, you have a high fever, you're seeing things that aren't there, and you're convinced that something evil is in the room with you. Your family doesn't call for a doctor immediately. They call for a Taoist priest or a Buddhist monk or maybe the local spirit medium, because your illness might not be medical, it might be spiritual. The spirit world in Imperial China was as real to people as the physical world. Ghosts, demons, fox spirits, ancestors, gods, these weren't metaphorical concepts. They were active forces that influenced daily life, caused problems, granted blessings, and demanded respect. Your house has a shrine to the household gods, the kitchen god who reports your family's behavior to heaven every new year, the door gods who protect against evil spirits, various local deities who control specific aspects of life. You make offerings to these gods regularly, incense, fake paper money, burned to send wealth to the spirit world, food offerings left on the altar. This isn't optional religious practice. This is mandatory spiritual maintenance. If you neglect the gods, bad things happen. The kitchen god reports your failures to the Jade Emperor. The door gods let demons into your house. Your ancestors become angry ghosts who cause problems for the living. Speaking of ancestors, you spend a significant amount of time and resources maintaining their worship. You have ancestral tablets in your home listing several generations of deceased family members. You make offerings to them on specific days, burn paper money and paper goods that they can use in the afterlife, and include them in family decisions. Your ancestors aren't gone, they're watching you. If you honor them properly, they protect and guide you. If you neglect them, they might send misfortune your way. This creates enormous pressure. To have sons, because sons perform the ancestral rites. If you die without sons, who will make offerings to your spirit? You'll become a hungry ghost, wandering the earth in perpetual suffering. But back to your current illness. The spirit medium arrives, usually an older woman with a reputation for communicating with the supernatural. She goes into a trance, her body convulsing, her voice changing to supposedly speak for a possessing spirit. The spirit, speaking through the medium, explains that you've offended a fox spirit by accidentally desecrating its shrine while working in the fields. Fox spirits are particularly dangerous. They can possess people, cause illness, drain your life force. The spirit demands offerings to appease it. Specific foods, incense, paper money, maybe a promise to rebuild the small shrine you damaged. Your family scrambles to provide these offerings even though they can't really afford it, because what choice do you have? If the spirit isn't appeased, you might die. The medium performs a ritual, chanting in languages you don't understand, waving blessed talismans over your body, sprinkling consecrated water. Does it work? Maybe your fever breaks. Maybe you start feeling better. This confirms that the spirit has been appeased and the treatment worked. Or maybe you get worse, which means either the offerings were insufficient or there's additional spiritual problems that need to be addressed. The line between medicine and magic is basically non-existent for most people. That herbal tea the physician prescribes, it works because the herbs have specific properties, yes, but also because the prescription is written on special paper with magical characters that imbue it with power. The acupuncture needles, they're adjusting qi flow, which is simultaneously a medical concept and a spiritual one. Talismans are everywhere in daily life. You wear protective amulets to ward off evil spirits. Travelers carry talismans for safe journeys. Pregnant women wear specific charms to protect the unborn child from demons who might try to steal or harm it. Children wear locks around their necks, symbolically locking them to this world so spirits can't take them. Temples dot the landscape, dedicated to various gods and bodhisattvas. You visit these temples to pray for specific things: a good harvest, success in examinations, healing for a sick relative, a child for a childless couple. You make offerings proportional to how desperately you need the god's help. Some gods specialize in specific concerns. Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, is particularly popular for matters of childbirth and compassion. Guan Yu, the deified general, protects against evil and is worshipped by soldiers and merchants. Local gods control local concerns: the god of a specific mountain, the dragon king of a particular river. During festivals, you participate in elaborate rituals that blend religious devotion with community celebration. The Ghost festival in the 7th lunar month is particularly important. This is when the gates of the underworld open and ghosts roam the earth. You make offerings to your ancestors, and also to any wandering ghosts who might cause trouble if they're not fed. The Mid-Autumn Festival involves moon worship and family reunions. New Year celebrations include cleaning the house to sweep away bad luck, putting up new door gods, setting off firecrackers to scare away evil spirits, and elaborate family meals. These aren't quaint traditions, they're serious spiritual business. Getting the rituals wrong could bring bad luck for the entire year. So you memorize the proper procedures, you spend money you don't have on the correct offerings, and you participate fully because the alternative is risking cosmic displeasure. Feng Shui, geomancy, determines where you build, where you bury your dead, how you arrange your furniture. The flow of qi through the landscape and through your living space affects your fortune. You hire a feng shui master to find the best burial site for your father, because the wrong location could bring misfortune to the entire family line for generations. Ghost stories are cautionary tales with real social function. The ghost of a woman who died unjustly seeks revenge. The ghost of a drowned person tries to lure others into the water to take their place. These stories reinforce moral behavior and social norms while also expressing genuine belief in supernatural forces. Some superstitions are about health and safety. You don't whistle at night because it attracts ghosts. You don't stick your chopsticks upright in rice because that resembles incense offerings to the dead. You don't give certain gifts because they're homophonic, with words for death or separation in Chinese. Numbers have meaning. 4 is avoided because it sounds like death. 8 is lucky because it sounds like prosperity. Your entire life is structured around these linguistic and numerical associations because you genuinely believe that they matter. The supernatural justice system runs parallel to the earthly one. You might escape punishment in the human world through wealth or connections, but the underworld courts keep perfect records. After death, you face judges who determine your punishment or reward based on your earthly behavior. This belief in cosmic justice helps people endure earthly injustice. The corrupt official might thrive now, but he'll suffer after death. Mixing Buddhism, Taoism, and folk religion is standard practice. You might visit a Buddhist temple one day, consult a Taoist priest the next, and make offerings to local spirits the day after. These aren't contradictory, they're different tools for different spiritual needs. Buddhism offers philosophical insight and paths to enlightenment. Taoism provides magical protection and harmony with nature. Folk religion handles everyday concerns. This spiritual landscape creates constant, low-level anxiety. Did you perform the rituals correctly? Did you accidentally offend a spirit? Is that bad harvest because of natural causes or supernatural punishment? Are your ancestors pleased with you? Every misfortune might have a spiritual cause that requires diagnosis and treatment, and the costs add up. Funeral rites for your parents are extraordinarily expensive. You need to hire priests, buy offerings, arrange for proper burial, feed mourners. This can bankrupt a family. But you can't skimp because everyone is watching, judging whether you're a filial child, and because inadequate funeral rites could doom your parents' spirits to suffering. This is daily life in Imperial China's spiritual landscape. The material world and the spirit world are inseparable. You navigate both simultaneously, trying to maintain good relationships with gods, ancestors, and spirits, while also dealing with the practical challenges of survival. It's exhausting, expensive, and there's never a moment when you can relax your spiritual vigilance, because the supernatural is always present, always watching, always ready to reward or punish your behavior. Conclusion: why you really wouldn't last a day. So here you are, you've spent a day, actually, we've covered much more than a day, experiencing Imperial China in all its brutal, complex, suffocating reality. And you're still convinced you'd survive here. Let's be honest about what you've just been through. You woke up in a rigid social hierarchy that determined your entire life before you were born. You worked in rice paddies filled with parasites, breaking your back for crops you don't own, giving most of your harvest to landlords who contribute nothing but their inherited privilege. You faced diseases that modern medicine could cure easily, but that here means suffering and often death. You watched women's feet being deliberately broken in childhood to satisfy beauty standards that crippled them for life. You experienced a justice system that used torture to extract confessions and punishments designed to be public spectacles of suffering. You lived in the shadow of the Forbidden City, where power concentrated in the hands of a semi-divine emperor you'd never see, served by mutilated eunuchs and imprisoned concubines. You were conscripted into armies where you were expendable, sent to fight in wars that meant nothing to you personally, facing enemies better trained and equipped than you'd ever be. You survived, barely. Earthquakes that destroyed your village, floods that turned your farmland into an inland sea, droughts that left your family starving. You navigated a supernatural landscape filled with gods, ghosts, and spirits who demanded constant attention and offerings you couldn't afford. Every aspect of your life was governed by rules, traditions, and expectations that prioritized order and hierarchy over individual happiness or freedom. And this isn't even everything. We haven't deeply explored the salt monopolies that made a basic seasoning unaffordable, the opium addiction that would ravage China in later periods, the ethnic tensions between Han Chinese and various minority groups and foreign rulers, the literary inquisitions where owning the wrong book could get your entire family executed, the environmental degradation from deforestation and soil exhaustion, the technological stagnation that left China increasingly vulnerable to foreign powers. We haven't talked enough about the sheer monotony and hopelessness that defined most people's lives. You're not building toward anything. You're not improving your situation. You're surviving day to day, year to year, hoping the next disaster doesn't destroy what little you have, knowing that your children will face exactly the same struggles you did, and their children after them. The romanticized version of Imperial China that appears in movies and literature, the noble scholars, the wise emperors, the martial arts masters, the elegant courtesans, that existed for maybe 1% of the population. For the other 99%, life was rice paddies and parasites, malnutrition and disease, back-breaking labor and early death. Modern people have no framework for understanding this level of sustained hardship. You've grown up with antibiotics, vaccines, anesthesia, sanitation, human rights, social mobility, the concept that your life can improve through effort and talent. You've never experienced real hunger, never lost multiple children to disease, never lived under a system where questioning authority could mean your entire family being executed. You wouldn't last a day, not because you're weak, though you are weaker than you think, physically and mentally softer than people who grew up working fields from age 5. You wouldn't last because you couldn't adapt to a worldview so fundamentally different from your own. You couldn't accept that your place in society is fixed from birth. You couldn't endure the constant surveillance and social pressure to conform. You couldn't stomach the brutality of punishments and the casualness of death. Most of all, you couldn't bear the hopelessness, the knowledge that this is it. This is your life. You're going to work fields you don't own, eat food that barely sustains you, watch your children face the same fate, and die young having accomplished nothing except surviving another day. There's no escape, no improvement, no hope that things will be better for the next generation. And yet hundreds of millions of people live these lives, generation after generation, for thousands of years. They endured things you can't imagine. They survived hardships that would break you within hours. They found moments of joy and meaning within systems designed to crush individuality and enforce submission. This doesn't make Imperial China some noble enterprise worth celebrating. The human cost was staggering. The wasted potential, the shortened lives. The suffering accepted as inevitable, because no one knew anything different. But it does mean that human resilience is more powerful than we usually give it credit for. The people who survived Imperial China weren't special or superhuman. They were ordinary people dealing with extraordinary hardship because they had no choice. They adapted, endured, and found ways to live within constraints that would seem intolerable to modern sensibilities. So when you think about why you wouldn't last a day in Imperial China, don't think of it as a personal failing. Think of it as evidence of progress. You wouldn't last because you've been raised in a world that, for all its problems, offers freedoms, comforts, and possibilities that Imperial Chinese peasants couldn't even imagine. You have access to medicine that seems like magic to them. You have rights they never knew existed. You have futures they could never dream of. The gap between your world and theirs isn't just time, it's a fundamental transformation in how human life is valued, how society is organized, how potential is realized. You wouldn't survive their world because you're adapted to a better one. And that's not weakness, that's proof that things really have gotten better. So the next time someone romanticizes the past, talking about how things were simpler or better back then, you can remember the reality of Imperial China. The broken feet, the parasites, the torture, the hopelessness, the endless labor, the casual cruelty, the staggering waste of human potential. And you can appreciate, maybe for the first time, just how fortunate you are to live now instead of then. Because the truth is simple and brutal. You wouldn't last a day in Imperial China. None of us would. And thank whatever gods or luck or progress got us here that we don't have to. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why Imperial China would have destroyed you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which historical period you want me to cover next. Because history is full of places and times that would have absolutely broken us, and I think it's important we understand just how good we have it. Until next time, stay curious, stay grateful for modern medicine, and maybe give your local government some credit for not using torture as a legal investigative technique. See you in the next video.